with a presentation, an overview from our reviser of statutes. Reviser Lawrence, we look forward to hearing what you have for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee. House Bill 2113, as amended by House Committee, relates to funding for conservation and certain water programs. So first, Section 1 of the bill would enact a new law to establish the State Conservation Fund in the State Treasury to finance conservation programs. On July 1, 2025, and each July 1 thereafter, $2.5 million would be transferred from the State General Fund to the State Conservation Fund. Monies in the fund would be used to provide a 2-to-1 match of state monies to non-state or private monies, and fund or provide domestic water quality sampling. Additionally, the Department of Agriculture, Division of Conservation, would adopt rules and regulations to administer the expending of fund monies. In developing the rules and regulations, the division would solicit input and facilitate public comment from industry members and stakeholders. Section 2 of the bill would amend KSA 82A 955, which was enacted in 2023 by House Bill 2302. And some of you may recall that this bill did go through this committee at the time. And for this section, there is a chart on page 2 of the reviser memo that might be helpful or might be more confusing, but it's there nonetheless. Currently, this statute requires $35 million to be transferred from the State General Fund to the State Water Plan Fund on July 1, 2025, and then provides that it is the intent of the legislature to provide for this transfer also in 2026 and 2027. House Bill 2113 would increase this transfer from $35 million to $55 million and authorizes that transfer to occur on July 1, 2025, 2026, and 2027. The next part of the bill then directs money to be transferred from the State Water Plan Fund to the Water Technical Assistance Fund and the Water Projects Grant Fund. For the Water Technical Assistance Fund, current law requires $5 million to be transferred from the State Water Plan Fund. House Bill 2113 would increase that transfer to $7 million. And for the Water Projects Grant Fund, current law requires $12 million to be transferred, and House Bill 2113 would increase that transfer to $18 million. The only other thing that I want to note for the committee is that House Bill 2007, as it passed the House, also amends the same statute and those transfers. That is on the chart in the memo. I'm not going to go into those details today, but I did want to make you aware that this statute is amended in that bill as well. House Bill 2113 would take effect upon publication in the Kansas Register. This bill did pass the House on a vote of 106 to 15, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, questions of our reviser? Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Reviser Lawrence, on the $2.5 million that goes into conservation, I see the language of the 2-to-1 match. Is this any relation? We approved a bill with the 2-to-1 match earlier this year. There's other money in the state water plan that goes for conservation. Can you explain how this fits with what we've typically done and what we've done this year?
Yes, so we did have a bill earlier this year that was specific to the conservation districts and providing that 2-to-1 match, and did increase that. I believe it increased the cap to allow for the 2-to-1 match also. This bill, while it also does have a 2-to-1 match, does not specifically mention conservation districts and states that this money would provide the 2-to-1 match of state money to non-state or private monies, and then also to the domestic water quality sampling. I would defer to the department and the Division of Conservation on what their plans are to actually expend that money and how that relates to the conservation districts.
That would be where the rules and regs may come in and how that gets spent.
Correct, thank you.
One other question that you mentioned, we amended in 2007, the House amended the amounts of money for the state water plan SGF transfer. Is it just they appropriated a different amount than what's here, or they're actually already changing this statute?
They actually do amend the statute. The SGF to State Water Plan Fund transfer is $35 million in current law, and in House Bill 2007, the numbers that they change are to the Water Technical Assistance Fund and the Water Projects Grant Fund.
That was in 2007?
Correct. It's section 188, I think, of that bill.
Thank you.
Additional questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you. Our first conferee, we have Representative Jim Minix. Representative Minnings, welcome to the Senate side of the Capitol.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's nice to be over here on the Monday morning after time change. This is going to be a challenge for me.
We did that on purpose because we saw you coming.
Well, I appreciate that very much. You can see my written testimony that I've turned in, and I also had a few slides. I'm not sure if you were able to download those or not.
So that would be, committee, your white folder?
Yeah, in the white folder is the same slides that I hope we can bring up.
I don't have those slides, or do we have those slides? We do have, okay.
And just for a little bit of background, House Bill 2113 basically is an extension of the 2302 bill that was done in 2023 session. At that time, we increased the appropriation to the Water Office by $35 million. This would increase it another 20. In answer to one of the questions asked earlier, you have already passed Senate Bill 36, which would do the 2-to-1 to match to the conservation districts. When I started on this bill in early November, and it was RS 0021, I did not know that other bill was going to run. And so I included that in the 2113 bill. The intent was for the local conservation districts to report water quality sampling results onto the Kansas Geological Survey. We need to encourage and develop a large water quality sampling database like we do for the quantity. We currently have annual water use reports put into those that water base or database at the Geological Survey. So I wanted the water quality to go in there also. Basically, these would be small domestic wells. The current database had 160 points, and that was mostly small municipals. With the domestics, that would add to it tremendously, to the information they have. There's a sheet in your folder. Looks like the last one. Basically to describe how the 2302 process worked, the small municipals who applied for grants for design or construction, the ones that were approved, they turn in quarterly reports for reimbursement. That money is all tracked very closely over at the Kansas Water Office. They're only paid on the invoices for the expenditures that they've made recently. Many of those 24 projects, when that grant was awarded, are still in process. Recently, we had the 2025 grant process. Let's see, I think there were 72 awards in the most recent one to small towns, and there's a sheet in your folder that lists all those towns. And on the other side of that are the 2302 grants for the 2024 year, and there's about 35 of those. These are basically small municipals who don't have any other recourse to raise their to improve their water systems, either drinking water or wastewater, other than increasing their water fees, or they're basically communities of 2,000 people or less. Within this first sheet that I brought your attention to, you notice on the upper right, I put an example on there, the city of Hays, Kansas. They've done something very well to provide for water conservation in their area. They instituted a 0.5-cent sales tax citywide. That 0.5-cent sales tax every year, let's see, 23 actual was $3,908,000 that raised. Since 1995, when they bought the R9 Ranch in Edwards County to bring water back to Hays and Russell, that's 35 years or 30 years ago. They have about 35 million put away to build that pipeline. But if you look at and this $3.9 million is just 1/3 of the funds that they collect. This is outside of what they charge for the monthly water bills. And then they have another fund that they take water from the wastewater system to the ballparks and the city parks around town. Each one of those is about a $3 million deal also. So you can see in the city of Hayes, sales tax, if you divide that 3.9 million by the 21,000, that's about $170 in sales tax just for 1/3 of their water system. $170 a month per person. That's man, woman, and child. They're looking forward to what they can do to conserve this water. I've had questions recently about, well, where's all this money going to, and we're not making any water. We're not going to make any water. It's a finite resource. What we're trying to do is save it for future generations. And the city of Hayes is doing an amazing job. They use about 93 gallons of water per person per day. Many of our other communities are in the 200 to 250 gallons per day. They have a very aggressive program to conserve water there because they had to. They recognized that finite source 30 years ago. And I think they've done an excellent job. Anyway, there's lots of other things through there. I can tell you that the bill, when it went through the House committee over there, was supported by the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts, Livestock Association, Municipal Utilities, League of Municipalities, Rural Water Associations, CARA, City of Waukene, Kansas Cooperative Council, City of Edgerton, and the Kansas Farm Bureau, with no opponents and no neutrals. And I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Representative, because you are a legislator, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions just in case you have another obligation that you need to get to. I know Senate or on the House, you don't start in the middle of the morning like we do.
We had calendar at 11 or 8, and I'm not necessary anywhere until 11. So I'll stay for as many questions.
Talk to us for another 2 hours.
Sure.
Okay, committee questions of Representative Minix. All right, seeing none, Representative, you're welcome to hang around the whole time for us.
Thank you very much.
Our next conferee committee is Aaron Popelka, Vice President of Legal and Government Affairs for the Kansas Livestock Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Aaron Popelka with the Kansas Livestock Association. And I thought what I'd do with the bill, I know there's a number of folks who maybe will talk to you about the overall number. I wanted to focus in on one piece of this that relates to the livestock industry. When the legislature passed 2302 a few years ago, there's a component in there that said that asked the Water Authority to make recommendations to use livestock water fees for livestock conservation projects. Typically, those fees, and I should note that in agriculture, stock water is the one water use that pays direct fees. Those typically run around $500,000 a year, depending on the number of cattle on feed we have in Kansas. And so this last summer, for the first time, that program got up and running, and the applicants for that program exceeded available funds, I think, by almost 3 times. And so I'm just talking about our specific piece to show that there is a need for additional funding. Most of what the fees went to, it ran through the Division of Conservation in Department of Ag, and we're really talking about making watering systems more efficient. And the main way to do that is in the winter, when it gets cold. Typically, the old way of doing things, tanks continuously run, so you have a constant flow of water so that the pipes don't freeze. There's been some technology to improve that, thermostatically controlled tanks that only turn on when it gets to a certain temperature, or floated tanks. And then also, KLA Environmental Services has developed a water recycling system to catch those overflows, filter it, and put it back into the livestock system. Those are all different types of funds that are used to cost share to improve efficiency around livestock operations. So With that, Mr. Chairman, again, I know there's a lot that goes into this overall number of how much more to put in. I just wanted to highlight our little piece of that. So happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
We'll go ahead and stand for questions. We don't have that many conferees appearing. We've got a lot of written, so we'll go ahead with questions. Questions of Mr. Popelka, committee? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you said you had about 3 times the requests than what you were able to fund in terms of this project?
I believe that is what the Division of Conservation relayed to us.
So we may expect more people to try to do that, but with this funding to continue, you could take care of that? Conservation changes in maybe the next 3 years?
Yes, I believe in talking with the department, the intent would be to use some additional funds from the 20 million or whatever the number ends up being to supplement that livestock conservation program.
Additional questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. Appreciate it. Our next conferee committee is Wendy Stark, Legislative Liaison with the League of Kansas Municipalities. The microphone just keeps going down, it seems like.
Yes, it does. And there are times I forget that it does go down and I stand on my tiptoes. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Wendy Stark with the League of Kansas Municipalities. And wanted, first of all, say thank you for House Bill 2302. That has made a huge difference. And this bill basically builds off of House Bill 2302. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that every year our members put together a statement of municipal policy. And one of our legislative priorities this year is related to water, and this bill directly relates to that. I've put together some information in my testimony on page 2, kind of talking about the number of cities that have applied for this. In 2024, 20.1% of cities who applied for grants received awards. And then in 2025, 36.5% of cities who applied were awarded grants. And that was because there, one, was an increase in the amount for that fund. So this does show that this is, 2302 is addressing that. Adding these additional funds will be helpful. In addition, I put together a chart that shows the region and the number of applicants from each region, so you can see that this is not just a problem in one part of the state, it's an issue across the entire state. I've also listed all of the cities who've been awarded grants, and that in 2024, Atwood, Bern, Burden, Burr Oak, Chetopa, Deerfield, Dexter, Downs, Effingham, Fowler, Harveyville, Logan, Mankato, McDonald, Milford, Miltonvale, Moran, Ness City, Ogden, Osborne, Paxico, Protection, Randolph, Republic, St. Paul, Tuscott, Timken, Wakefield, Waterville, Williamsburg, and Wilson. In 2025, there were an additional 50 grants awarded, and those are listed on page 2. And with that, I would be happy to stand for any questions. We do support this bill and ask it to be passed favorably out of committee. Thank you.
Questions, committee? The application for grants, of course, this is 2302 is relatively new, and there was, if I can use the word, a backlog of needs. Do you see in the future, not immediate future, but not too distant future, where the requests for grants would start to be reduced? Or do you think that it's going to remain relatively high for the foreseeable future?
It honestly depends on what happens. I think it's going to take several years, one, because of the backlog and the amount of need. One of the other things that I forgot to mention is that of those who applied, 100 of those cities had a population of 500 or less. And so, in those cities, there are a lot of times it's more difficult for them to find traditional funding sources. So when you're looking at the smaller communities, I think there's going to be a need for a while. However, it really depends on what happens with regulations. If things come down with having to change pipes, if what happens regulatory, that will always affect water.
That does make sense. I just was thinking that potentially once a lot of these systems are brought up, modernized, that they would last for a while and not need any funds, so the requests might be reduced. But I realize I'm asking you to look into a crystal ball, but because of representing the League of Municipalities, I thought you might have.
Well, I mean, I think this is helping, and I think this will help reduce the immediate need. What that need is 10 years from now, I can't predict, but I think it's addressing it's helping to address what our immediate needs. Plus, it's identifying what those needs are, and cities are looking for resources outside of 2302 for funding. But it's identifying that and letting folks know what those needs are.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Reichman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank you, Wendy Starks, for your presentation. I'm in southwest Kansas, and as I was looking through this list here, I see that as far as all the groups, that they're by far the lowest that applied for it. And we got a lot of small little towns there, and also we're always hurting for water. And so I was wondering if you could put on your crystal ball hat, like the chairman said, and explain to me why Fowler is the only one in the 38th district that applied for that.
They were awarded. I have a full list of the 219 cities, and I can share this with the committee. I've just put together an Excel file that shows the 219 cities, if they applied in 24 and 25, and whether or not they were awarded. So there are more. And one reason I actually meant to go back and look, because Southwest Kansas actually has, on average, fewer cities than other regions. And so I was actually going to look at it based on the number of applications versus the actual number of cities, and I did not get that done, so I apologize.
You're trying to tell me that you're not prejudiced against southwest Kansas? I'd like to see those figures. Thank you.
Sure.
Senator Starnes.
Thank you, Chairman. My question, as far as these grants, what's the criteria of how they're awarded?
I would actually defer to the water office on that. They're the ones who set the criteria. I know on their website for House Bill 2302 grants, they set out the criteria and the rubric for how they are going to measure and evaluate and award the grants.
Additional questions, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Senator Reichman said, there are a lot of small towns on this. Are they using that for replacement, or are they using it for expansion?
I don't have I have not seen the applications. I am just documenting the towns that have submitted this. I would say based on the amounts, looking at the website, some of these are for technical assistance, and some of them are for infrastructure projects themselves. But each individual community has a different application, and I don't see those applications.
Thank you.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I may save my question for utilities or the water office, because it was also looking at how these grants helped the future then of those communities. So thank you.
All right. Additional questions? Thank you for your presentation, your testimony, and we will move to our next conferee, which we don't have the best of the SWATty gang, but we do have at least one here. I just had to say that, Mr. SWATty, because some of you have been around a little while, but he actually served as the vice chair of the House Agriculture Committee back when he was 18 years of age, or about that age.
Just as the state was getting started, Mr. Chairman, so. No, I appreciate it. And also, Mr. Chairman, you are factually correct. I am the lesser half of the SWATty gang. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'm here on behalf of the Kansas Municipal Utilities, which is the statewide association of all of the electric, natural gas, water, and wastewater municipally owned systems in the state of Kansas. We have around 900 municipal members. We also do water training for those member municipalities across the state of Kansas, and we are rising in support of the piece of legislation that's before you today. I want to make make sure that you understand that it's a part of a suite of legislation that's been moving that really got started with House Bill 2302, which created those grant programs. But all of these pieces fit together. And so just kind of addressing a couple of the questions that were asked on the previous conferee, I want to make sure you understand the state is trying to address how to not simply triage these requests, but to have a systematic approach to it. Part of that is the task force that's being developed and the moving parts that are associated with that task force. And so instead of simply having communities all bring requests forward, we begin to look holistically at how do we fund this so that we are not coming in front of the legislature every year with requests long term, but then also how do we begin to process these requests into an order so that the state really thinks about, all right, how can we fund the sort of projects that begin to limit the requests moving forward because we are really addressing those issues. And so this piece of legislation is important to that. But also the other piece of legislation that addresses the task force is important to that as well. Senator Reichman, to your question about Southwest Kansas, kind of an interesting thing about water infrastructure, age matters. And so as you get older in your community, you have a lot more embedded infrastructure that is harder to find. And Southwest Kansas is actually one of the newer parts of the state from a municipality perspective. When we get into questions of unmapped lead lines, or in some situations, and Representative Blex can talk about this, but we've had situations where communities were literally using a hollow log as a portion of a water delivery line in their embedded system. You tend to find those in older communities. And so Kansas City, Kansas, Leavenworth, Southeast Kansas. And so as the state begins to, as I said before, triage these requests, they have a lot of requests that might hit a little more than Southwest Kansas because some of that Southwest Kansas infrastructure, brand new, is only hitting 100 years of age now, where we've got some communities in eastern Kansas where it's 150 years of age. So that's, I cannot speak to the decision-making process within the Department of the Water Office, but I'm guessing that probably has something to do with it as well. But we certainly rise in support of this piece of legislation, but also want to speak to the fact that it fits together with everything else that this legislature has been doing over the past few years. The other request, or the other question that came up in the last conferee was, is this dealing with expansion or just maintenance? I think in most cases, these are creating better systems would be in the maintenance file. Most cities, when they have an expansion, do tend to fund those themselves. The most, or in conjunction with a different pool of state and federal aid than what these grants were designed to do. And the most recent example of that would be the Helmar Cheese facility in Dodge City. Dodge City went out and had to build an entirely new wastewater treatment facility to handle all of the wastewater coming off of that facility. And again, back to this suite of legislation that moved through, this body passed a bill that that allowed them to extend out their payments on that from, I think, 20 years to 30 years to help them do that process. So all of it fits together. All of it's important, as is this piece of legislation. With that, I'd stand for questions.
I misspoke. You were not vice chair of the House. You were
It was ranking minority. You advanced the Democrats well beyond where they ever were when I was in the House.
All right, committee questions of Mr. Swati. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is really in terms of these projects. I know that we are looking very much at water quality. Do any of these also help with water quantity? Are there some things that we can learn from what the city of Hayes has done when cities are implementing new or changed systems?
I do think that is probably a question most appropriate for the Water Office, but I do also think that, and that does remind me, Senator, I did forget to also mention Southwest Kansas broadly. I mean, most people, when we think about water quantity issues, we think about Southwest Kansas. But when it comes to municipalities, in reality, the municipalities that are perhaps most pressed by water quantity issues are not in Southwest Kansas. The Ogallala Aquifer is a function of economics. And so we are reducing the amount of water in the Ogallala, except that it's always, I mean, if you drill deeper and spend more money, you can get more water. Well, for corn growers, you eventually reach a point where it no longer becomes worthwhile. If you are a municipality serving water to citizens that need to drink, there's probably a different economic forecast for that. You cross that with communities along the Smoky Hill River. The Smoky Hill River is actually the oldest river system in the state of Kansas. It's actually geographically lower than the Arkansas River, if that matters to any of you at 8:40 or 9 o'clock in the morning, but it's kind of interesting. And there's very little alluvial flow along that river, and so it's difficult for communities to just tap into the water that might be flowing in the sand nearby that river, because the Smoky Hill's almost on bedrock. So Hayes, Russell, Ellsworth, Salina, Abilene, these have, in some cases, more critical long-term quantity needs. And I do think there's flexibility in these grants to address both quality and quantity, but the Water Office would know more specifically.
Additional questions, committee? Senator Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Svati, I'm hearing based off your testimony that Senator Reichman should feel young today. Is that correct?
It's the youngest member of the committee, Senator.
One question for you. I think one of the great frustrations for folks is that sometimes people feel like their government operates off of the 4 Ps, and I won't say what that means right now, but you can look it up later. But how do we, obviously we have something that needs to be fixed right now in a moment of time, but how do we guarantee in the future that there's maybe better planning moving into the future for replacement, continual replacement of infrastructure over time, so we don't wind up with 100-year-old pipes, so to speak?
That is a good question, Mr. Chairman. I do think the task force is going to help address that. And the one nice thing about overhauling or new wastewater systems are these tend to be generational infrastructure. And so unless something really goes wrong or the community grows so rapidly they have to redo it, these tend to be very old. If you are back in your own home community, your wastewater treatment facility, unless it's brand new, is probably older than you are. Wichita is either finishing or they have just finished their new wastewater treatment facility, and that replaces one that I dare not misspeak, but I think it's at least a century old. And so they do tend to last a very long time as long as they are well designed and well planned. But we want to get to the point where, yes, this is not just a constant barrage of requests for new funds, that we've actually thought through how to do this. Yeah.
Additional questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. I do appreciate it. Committee, I will draw your attention to written proponent testimony from Ken Askren with the Kansas Farm Bureau, Randy Stuckey, Kansas Grain and Feed, and Renew Kansas Biofuels, Travis Lowe with the Kansas Society of Professional Engineers, Alan Parker with Water One, Sean Miller with the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts. I don't know about this next name, Elmer Ronabum. He's with the Kansas Rural Water Association, and Shahira Stafford, Kansas Cooperative Council. So there are plenty of written testimony for you to read through, see if there's anything additional that you can learn other than the fact that they do support the legislation. I didn't have you listed, Mr. Miller, as an oral, but I will allow you, since we have time, if you wish to step up to the mic. Sean Miller, Kansas Association of Conservation Districts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for that if we didn't get that turned in as oral. I was hoping to make just a few brief comments. Senate Bill 36, as you all know, is the bill that you passed earlier today. The senator from Pot County had a few questions about that.
This session, it wasn't today.
Sorry. Earlier this session, yes, sir. And I really appreciate that. I was probably the reason we have a couple of things moving along. I was working with the leadership of this committee to draft Senate Bill 36. And so that's the reason that we were moving forward on that. That particular bill amends KSA 2-1907C, which is the conservation district funding. The one thing that I did want to just quickly say is Senator Titus asked about the funding from the State Water Plan Fund that was moving from that. That funding was placed in the Department of Ag budget, and it's my understanding watching this committee last week that that funding was actually removed from the budget. So that additional $1.75 million that was in there to help fund the 2-to-1 match in Senate Bill 36 has been removed from the budget. Would love, and we'll visit with some of you later about whether Senate Ways and Means would be willing to replace that. But if not, the money included in House Bill 2113 would be really key to the operations of those budgets. So I apologize again if we got turned in as written. I appreciate you allowing me to stand up and chat a little bit, and we'll be happy to answer any questions anybody may have.
Questions of Mr. Miller, committee? Seeing none.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. Committee, we have no opponents to the legislation. We have no neutrals to the legislation, House Bill 2113. So with that, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2113. As has been mentioned, a part of the bill, if you will, has already passed this committee in Senate Bill 36. And so we will deal with the legislation on another day, as is customary. I do want to direct your attention to Senate Bill 211 committee. This is a bill we started working on prior to jumping into budgets. There had been an amendment offered and adopted, and so I want to see if we can go ahead and finish our work on Senate Bill 211. Give you a moment to find that in your packet. While you're looking, we will ask our reviser to bring us up to speed on where exactly we are in the legislation, amendment-wise, et cetera. Reviser Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman noted, the committee has already adopted one amendment to this bill. The amendment is on page 2. And in line 22 would strike "or members of the commission," and instead would say members of the commission may submit any proposed rules and regulations. And that was the amendment that was adopted.
Questions, committee of the reviser? Okay, seeing none. As has been mentioned, I'm not even finding my bill. I know I've got it somewhere, but the legislation has been amended. Committee, what is your pleasure with Senate Bill 211? Thank you. Senator Fagg.
Mr. Chairman, I had an amendment. I see it's in my packet here. I don't know if everybody has this. Do we bring this up at this time?
It has not been offered. If you want to offer it.
Sure. I'd like to, I think everybody has that in their packet. They don't, then I've got it in my packet. Okay. Thank you. So a year ago, I sat in on a conference meeting, and I got to looking at who represents what area in this thing, and I got home and got thinking about that. The only reason I'm bringing it up now is because we're working on 211, and Supervisor Lawrence, do they have a copy of this too that shows it? Okay. So I'll tell you about it real quick. The thought process was, as you read through that, is that right now the Speaker of the House has District 4. District 4's got 820,000 people that live in there, and the President of the Senate has Region 3, which has 202,000 in it. So my thought process was that there is actually 5 regions, and the thought that we would take and do at-large for the Speaker of the House, at-large for the President of the Senate, and then the one that gets out on this deal, and I visited with the Attorney General with this, and he didn't have a problem, but he would represent Region 2. Region 2 has 1,318,000. So he's going to have a bigger area. I don't know if the legal part of it fits into that, but so that would be his part. And then the other one is that the governor would have the 1, 2, 3, 4, so that she could pick out, or the governor at that time could pick out from those areas. So what this really does is kind of make it more palatable, as far as I'm concerned, as to how we do this. And the two at-larges fit into that, and the Attorney General with his part, and then the governor with her part. So I guess with that, I'd stand for questions on this.
Well, let's see if we get a second on your amendment. Are you going to move?
Sure, I'll move the amendment.
All right, so it's moved by Senator Fagg to amend Senate Bill 211, seconded by Senator Reichman. Now we will go to questions. If you will remember, those of you who were here in 2024, we changed the way that the Wildlife and Parks Commission was appointed, and this would change the way, another change. So I will let the committee determine what they think is best here. It does make sense, certainly to the chair, to allow the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House a little more flexibility rather than being assigned to a particular region of the state, because the Speaker and the President will change and they may not even know anything about the regions of the state. So that would make it at large. And then the governor would have, you said 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 1, 3, 4, correct, Senator Fagg?
Yes.
Okay. And then, as you can see, Attorney General would be Region 2. Questions on the amendment of Senator Fagg? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not on this amendment, but previously we had an amendment that changed word in line 2. Did that, and refresh my memory, did we accept that amendment? It was a changed word, requiring to allowing.
You're talking about in the title, correct? Up top.
No, line 2.
Line 2 in the title, and that amendment was adopted, correct, Revisor? Okay, yes, sir, it was. Okay, back to the amendment. Additional questions? Senator Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for Senator Fagg, if I might.
Absolutely.
Senator Fagg, have you spoken with any of the current members of the commission or the appointed individuals to determine their thoughts on kind of the new scheme that you've mapped out?
Senator Fagg.
No, I haven't. I did talk to the Attorney General about it. I was concerned about how he'd feel, because he was at large going to go down to 1. So when I was talking to him about something else, and he said he didn't have a problem with that, so.
Senator Shane, is that your only question? Okay. And this would not change anything as far as the dates. Current members would serve until such time as expiration of their current term, and then the appointment differences would take place, correct? Would that present any problem, do you think, Revisor Lawrence, on the regions, changing regions?
I actually spoke to the revisor himself about this and was advised that it would be up to the committee to decide how they wanted the current appointees to roll off and new members to be appointed. So if the committee has any particular direction they want to go, we would have to work on language to get that done.
So, Senator Fagg, did you understand what was being said there, the topic, and how we might need to some clarifying language?
I didn't know that part, so. I didn't know that. She was facing the other way, and I couldn't understand part of that. But I understand where you're trying to come from, so.
Because not all commission members roll off at the same time.
Right.
Yes, Senator.
Yes, so currently, based on the changes to the statute in 2024, the members appointed by the Speaker, the President, and the Attorney General are currently serving an initial term of 2 years. And then after that initial appointment, their terms would be 4 years, which the members who are appointed by the governor, their terms are currently 4 years.
And but they are staggered is when their terms conclude, correct?
Correct.
So, Senator Fagg.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a problem with that. That's my opinion. Unless there's somebody else has any suggestions to that. My big thing was the 200,000, the 800,000, the Speaker of the House might not even live in the district, you know, know somebody. So that was the kind of stuff I was trying to clean up with this.
Revisor, would a date certain, if we picked a date, added a date in here effective this particular date, that the appointments then would roll according to this amendment? Because I'm seeing the possibility of having two representatives from a particular region and none from another region.
Yes, if that is the will of the committee, you could choose a particular date when all of them would have to change over.
Okay. When would that be? The Speaker and the President have appointed members for 2 years. At the end of that 2 years, would that potentially be, so in 2026 or 7, 26, they were appointed in 24. Okay. So this amendment, I understand what it does, but it does create a little bit of issue that we need to address as it relates to the dates. I'm trying to determine, I don't like to kick a bill out of a committee that's not ready to run on the floor. I don't like to kick a bill out knowing that, okay, we're going to then offer an amendment on the floor unless it's later brought to the attention of the chair that there's a technical or something like that. But in this case, we need a date, I guess, is the point, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one concern that I also think we should look at is you don't want the whole commission to roll off at the same time just because we think we need to pick a date to adjust this. So I think it might help if we could get the information about, look at both those times and then the districts and see if there is any way that we could make a proposal that would allow a reasonable turnover, but not just one date. I think I'm a little fearful that we, you know, already had quite a bit of change in the commission, and then that would just change it once again.
Do you have researched the dates of the commission members' term expiration? Okay, you'd have to get it, okay. Senator Fagg? Because I'm thinking committee, we may need to not finish our work on 211 today, but first thing in the morning, because that would give us adequate time to come up with a list of when they expire, get a date. This amendment has not been adopted, but I would prefer, if we are going to consider the amendment, that it be complete.
Clean that up, yeah.
So we will leave the motion on the table with the second. We'll get the dates. There'll probably need to be a substitute motion or a withdrawal of this motion, and then move forward with another amendment. Senator Titus.
Just to ask a question so I'm clear before we officially table this, this would allow, though, the two at-larges could be from the same district, correct? There's nothing that would require them to have a geographic spread there.
Senator Fagg or Revisor, I think the answer would be yes.
Yes.
Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Sure. I wouldn't use the word tabling the bill. Okay. So any additional questions on the amendment before we adjourn for the day? And then we will ask Senator Fagg to, and for the committee benefit, to get the information on the terms of the current commission. So if we do adopt this amendment, unless the committee just wants to vote this down, which I don't think necessarily they do, we'll take that first thing in the morning, and then we'll get into, we do have a full agenda for tomorrow, and also we have a full agenda for Wednesday, Thursday, and Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say I did have another amendment on this bill. I don't know if it would be good to share that with the committee now so that they could also look at that before tomorrow.
Okay, well, I was unaware that you had an amendment. So I'm going to ask Senator Fagg if you would withdraw your motion to amend. Are you willing to do that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Is the second willing to do that? Okay, and then we know that this will be coming forward first thing tomorrow morning, and that way we can deal with Senator Francisco's motion to amend. So we'll continue working Senate Bill 211. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize because I think we just got busy last week, and I should have mentioned this to you. So this deals with the all the appointments, because I think it made a lot of sense to me that starting on lines 33, page 133, that we're saying in no case shall any respective appointing authority appoint a shooting area licensee or a person who provides hunting outfitting services or hunting guide services. So this amendment would change that to say that they wouldn't appoint a person who is or within 5 years prior to the appointment has been, those things. I think one concern I had is you can provide hunting outfitting services, find out that you are going to be appointed to this commission, and sell that to your son or daughter or another family member. So I just like the idea, if we didn't want to have those kinds of employees, that I think putting some kind of time limit would be helpful. Happy to stand for any questions.
You make a motion to amend, correct?
I make that motion to amend.
Is there a second? Senator Ware seconds the motion. Now, discussion on the motion. Questions of the maker of the motion to amend. Senator Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Francisco, can you speak to what the benefits would be that would be derived through such amendment?
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Shane. So I think the benefit would be that you wouldn't be in a situation where an appointment can be made to someone who has the week before been involved in providing hunting outfitting services. And there isn't a clear way to say, in terms of this, that there isn't a clear way to say that, again, as I pointed out, you can't just sell that service to a family member and essentially continue, be in that business and be a member of the commission.
Senator Shane.
Yeah. Excuse me. I guess I'm just wondering what value this provision provides at all, like regardless of the amendment, because we serve as a citizens legislature. There's not a single profession that would be prohibited or business that would be prohibited from, a member of the legislative body from participating in and being a member of the legislature. I guess I'm wondering what overall protection and value this provision provides, period, let alone going into 5 years prior history. I think a lot of our outfitters are actively engaged in conservation, would have a lot of important things to say. So with that, I would oppose this amendment.
Additional questions, comments? Senator Francisco, you wish to close on your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would say in response to that, that yes, we are a citizen legislature, but there are times when individual senators do not vote on bills because they have a conflict of interest. Certainly, we've had senators had automobile dealership, and they did not vote on taxes. We've had a senator who had a gun manufacturing business, and so he withdrew. So I don't think we would want people on this commission to have to not be able to vote because they have a conflict. And I think that whoever wrote this in the first place absolutely understood that conflict, but I don't think it's protective enough. And I think we've seen some issues in the most recent appointments because it was not protective enough.
All right.
I move my amendment.
You've heard the motion to amend. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion appears to pass. Motion does pass, so the bill is amended with this amendment. Any additional amendments other than Senator Fagg? Okay, I just thought we could go ahead and deal with them, because first up again in the morning will be, San Francisco.
I don't have another amendment, but I understood that there may have been one to look at the question of proposed rules and regulations. If there isn't someone who is offering that, I would like to do that as well tomorrow.
Okay,
Just telling you.
we are out of time today, so, and you don't have that amendment prepared to balloon, correct?
I don't. I had seen that, so a member of the committee shared that with me, so, but if it's not going to be introduced, then I will work with the reviser.
Okay. Again, committee, tomorrow we will be squeezed on time, so we will need to be efficient with our time, but we will start our meeting with 211, see if we can wrap up the committee decision on 211. I have nothing further for the committee. With